In a week defined by diplomatic confusion, last-minute reversals, and a peace process that seems to move forward and backward simultaneously, Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araqchi has been the most traveled man in the Middle East, shuttling between Islamabad, Muscat, and Moscow in a frantic effort to shore up Iran's position, secure allied support, and maintain the fiction that meaningful negotiations with the United States are still possible. Whether those negotiations are actually moving forward, or whether they represent the most elaborate diplomatic theater of the current crisis, is a question that nobody, at this moment, can answer with confidence. Moscow, Iran seeks Putin's backing. The most strategically significant stop on Iraqi's marathon diplomatic tour was Moscow, where the Iranian foreign minister held direct talks with Russian President Vladimir Putin, the first such high-level engagement between Tehran and Moscow since the conflict with the United States and Israel entered its current phase. The substance of the Putin-Iraqi discussions centered on the U.S.-Israeli military campaign against Iran and the state of the diplomatic process aimed at ending it. Araqchi arrived in Moscow seeking something specific: continued and visible Russian support for Iran's position, both as a source of political backing in international forums and as a signal to Washington that Iran is not diplomatically isolated despite the severity of the military pressure it is under. The Iranian foreign minister told Putin directly that Iran has fulfilled its objectives in the conflict, a claim that will raise eyebrows in Washington, and argued that it is the United States, not Iran, that has failed to meet its stated goals and is now obstructing the path to a negotiated resolution. Araqchi characterized American behavior throughout the ceasefire period as a pattern of coercion, imposing conditions, violating the terms of the truce through continued naval blockades and ship seizures, and using the threat of resumed military force as a negotiating weapon rather than engaging in genuine diplomacy. His message to Putin was clear: Iran is trying to negotiate, the United States is making negotiation impossible. And Russia's continued support for Tehran's cause strengthens Iran's resolve to resist American pressure rather than capitulate to it. Putin's response, and the precise nature of any commitments made during the meeting, has not been made public. But the very fact of the meeting and Araqchi's willingness to travel to Moscow at this critical juncture speaks to how seriously Tehran is working to consolidate whatever diplomatic and political support it can find as the pressure from Washington continues to mount. The Islamabad saga, a diplomatic mystery. Before reaching Moscow, Araqchi's movements created a story of diplomatic confusion that left observers across the region struggling to understand what was actually happening and why. The Iranian foreign minister traveled to Islamabad, the Pakistani capital, in advance of the second round of U.S.-Iran talks that were expected to take place there, with Pakistan serving as the host and mediator for what would have been a historic direct encounter between Iranian and American negotiators. Then, on Saturday night, Araqchi abruptly left Islamabad without explanation, departing the Pakistani capital before the American delegation arrived and before any talks could occur. The departure created immediate confusion in diplomatic circles and prompted President Trump to cancel the American mission entirely, telling reporters bluntly that he was not going to send people halfway around the world for meetings that the other side was not going to attend. But the story did not end there. In a move that deepened the confusion rather than resolving it, Araqchi subsequently returned to Islamabad, suggesting that his initial departure may have been a tactical maneuver rather than a definitive withdrawal. Pakistani officials, speaking on condition of anonymity because they were not authorized to discuss the details publicly, suggested that constructive conversations between Iranian and American representatives were continuing through Pakistani intermediaries, even as both sides publicly maintained that direct face-to-face talks had not taken place as planned. From Islamabad, Araqchi then traveled to Muscat, the Omani capital, where Oman has been serving as a back-channel mediator between the United States and Iran. His visit to Oman was followed by return travel to Islamabad and then onward to Moscow, a circuit of diplomatic engagement that suggests Iran is simultaneously pursuing multiple tracks and seeking support and leverage from multiple directions. The nuclear file, a new complication adding a further layer of complexity to an already extraordinarily complicated situation. The United Nations nuclear watchdog has confirmed a development that has raised alarm in both Washington and Jerusalem. Iran has announced the existence of what it describes as a new technological achievement, a 440-kilogram nuclear-capable device that represents a significant advancement in Iran's nuclear program. The announcement, confirmed by the International Atomic Energy Agency, does not mean Iran has produced a nuclear weapon. But it demonstrates a level of technical progress that moves Tehran meaningfully closer to that capability, and that fundamentally shapes the American and Israeli calculus about how long diplomacy can be allowed to continue before military options must be considered. For the United States, Iran's nuclear program has always been the deepest and most intractable issue at the heart of the conflict. Washington's non-negotiable demand that Iran permanently abandon any pathway to nuclear weapons capability runs directly into Iran's equally non-negotiable assertion of its right to peaceful nuclear technology. The announcement of a new nuclear-capable device, whatever its precise technical significance, is not designed to make that gap easier to bridge. Oman's role, the strait, and the money. Iran's engagement with Oman carries dimensions that go beyond traditional diplomatic mediation. A regional official with direct knowledge of the mediation effort, speaking on condition of anonymity, revealed that Iran has approached Oman with a specific proposal related to the Strait of Hormuz. Tehran is seeking Oman's support for a mechanism that would allow Iran to collect fees from commercial vessels transiting the strait, effectively institutionalizing the payment arrangement that President Trump has publicly condemned as piracy and that the United States has vowed to prevent. Oman's response to this request has not been made public, but the fact that Iran is pursuing such an arrangement through the one Gulf state that maintains productive relations with both Tehran and Washington reveals something important about Iran's strategic thinking. Even as it negotiates, Iran is simultaneously seeking to establish new facts on the ground, or in this case on the water, that would give it ongoing economic leverage over one of the world's most critical shipping lanes. The same regional official confirmed that Iran has made the lifting of the American naval blockade a firm precondition for returning to any new round of direct talks, and that Pakistani mediators are actively working to find a formula that could bridge this gap without requiring either side to make a visible, politically costly concession before talks begin. The human cost, a war in numbers. Amid all the diplomatic maneuvering and strategic calculation, it is worth pausing to account for what this conflict has actually cost in human lives since it began. According to available figures, the war has killed at least 335 people inside Iran. In Lebanon, where Hezbollah's parallel conflict with Israel has been raging alongside the main confrontation, 2,900 people have been killed. In Israel itself, 23 people have died as a result of Iranian missile and drone strikes. 10 people have been killed in Gulf states affected by the conflict. 15 people have died in Lebanon in fighting separate from the main casualty figures. 13 American service members have been killed across the regional theater, and 6 members of a United Nations peacekeeping force in northern Lebanon have also lost their lives. These are not abstractions. They are fathers and mothers, soldiers and civilians, people whose deaths have left families shattered and communities in grief across a region that has known too much of both. A 3-week truce between Israel and Hezbollah remains nominally in place, though Hezbollah has stated publicly that it was not party to the agreement and does not consider itself bound by its terms. The situation in Lebanon remains deeply unstable. Oil markets, the economic barometer of war. Global energy markets continue to function as the world's most immediate and unambiguous barometer of the conflict's trajectory, and the readings are alarming. As markets opened on Sunday, oil prices surged on news of the continued standoff and the uncertain state of diplomatic progress. U.S. crude futures were trading at $96.50 per barrel, a figure that represents a 44% increase from the $67 per barrel at which oil was trading before the conflict began. International benchmark Brent crude has reached $107.75 per barrel, up 48% from its pre-war level of $72 just 2 weeks ago, and still climbing. The trajectory of these numbers tells its own story. Oil was trading at $67 per barrel before the war. It is now approaching $110. That difference, more than $40 per barrel, is being paid by consumers at fuel pumps, by airlines managing soaring jet fuel costs, by manufacturers absorbing higher energy prices, and by governments across the developing world whose populations are feeling the effects of energy inflation most acutely. The path to lower oil prices runs directly through the Strait of Hormuz. And the path through the Strait of Hormuz runs directly through the negotiations that are, at this moment, happening in hotel lobbies and government offices across Islamabad, Muscat, Moscow, and Washington, with results that remain painfully unclear. Germany steps forward. Mine clearance in the Strait. In one of the more unexpected diplomatic and military developments of the week, Germany has signaled a willingness to contribute to international efforts to clear the mines that Iran has laid in the Strait of Hormuz, a contribution that, if authorized by the German parliament, would represent Berlin's most direct military involvement in the current crisis. German Defense Minister Brigadier General Robert Koch confirmed in a weekend interview that the United States is deploying naval assets to the Mediterranean in preparation for mine-clearing operations in the strait. He stated that Germany could participate in an international mission to restore safe navigation through the waterway, specifically noting that the German Navy has world-class expertise in mine detection and mine clearance operations that could make a meaningful contribution to the effort. Chancellor Heinz Marschall confirmed that Germany would seek a parliamentary mandate before committing any forces, consistent with German constitutional requirements and the political sensitivities surrounding military deployments. But the signal was clear. Germany is prepared to act. The German Navy's mine clearance capabilities are, in the Chancellor's words, very good, and Berlin is willing to deploy them in coordination with its partners to ensure the freedom and safety of international navigation through one of the world's most vital waterways. 2 American mine-clearing vessels are already operating in the strait. The addition of German naval expertise would significantly accelerate the timeline for making the waterway safe for commercial shipping, a development that would have immediate positive effects on global oil prices and on the economies of every nation that depends on the strait for energy imports. The prerequisite, as both Koch and the Chancellor noted, is that the military conflict in the region must be sufficiently resolved to permit safe deployment of mine-clearing forces. The end of the conflict is not just a diplomatic goal, it is a physical prerequisite for the restoration of normal maritime commerce through the Strait of Hormuz. The state of play. Movement without resolution. Independent Pakistani political analyst Shia Mohammed Ali offered perhaps the most balanced assessment of where the diplomatic process currently stands, acknowledging the delays and reversals of recent weeks while maintaining that meaningful progress is still possible. The delays are not a definitive setback, he argued. Negotiations of this complexity and consequence cannot be expected to move in a straight line. The tensions between Washington and Tehran have been building for decades. They cannot be resolved overnight. The process requires patience. And the good news, he noted, is that both sides remain willing to explore an end to the conflict that does not require either party to accept terms it considers genuinely intolerable. That assessment may be cautiously optimistic, but it is not obviously wrong. Both sides have refrained from resuming full-scale military operations. The ceasefire, however frayed and however contested, has held. Diplomatic channels, through Pakistan, through Oman, through direct communications that both sides periodically acknowledge and periodically deny, remain open. Iran's foreign minister is in Moscow, seeking Russian support while signaling continued openness to negotiation. America's special envoy is waiting for a phone call from Pakistani officials. Oman is mediating between 2 parties who have not yet found the language for a deal but have not yet abandoned the search for one. Germany is preparing mine-clearing vessels. and oil markets are watching every development with the anxious attention of an investor who knows that the difference between war and peace is worth $40 per barrel. The Strait of Hormuz remains partially closed. The world's economy continues to absorb the cost. And somewhere in the diplomatic space between Tehran and Washington, in the conversations that happen through intermediaries, and in the signals sent through communiques and cancellations and surprise returns to negotiating tables, the outline of an agreement may still be taking shape. Whether it will take shape fast enough before the next military incident, the next assassination attempt, the next seized tanker, the next missile launched in anger, is the question on which the fate of the region, and quite possibly the stability of the global economy, now depends.